Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to touch base after our first week of e-learning and kind of give you some updates as to where we are at and where we're headed. Um, the first thing is this week has been rough on a lot of us. Just hearing reports from families, other administrators. Was in several meetings this week and just hearing the different stories and the different struggles that people are having with what's going on right now. And then the parts where people are coming in to pick those pieces up and supporting each other and helping. It's been a long week, but we're also seeing a lot of very, very supportive people. And it's really good to see because if it's happening for each other, then it's also happening for our kids. And that's awesome as well. So I hope all of you are doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and your families and not putting too much pressure on yourselves moving forward. You'll also notice that Tracy Landry sent a video. I can't remember if it was last night or this morning, and that video talks about our new calendar, our new schedule, and what that's going to look like. And the whole purpose of that was to keep people from burning the candle at both ends, um, trying to get something done all day, every day, and trying to provide students with something every minute of the day. So hopefully with that in mind, you can kind of see where all of this is going. We started off trying to do the most that we could, the best that we could for students. And a lot of that was trying to create and provide education as it was in the classroom. And that's just not going to happen. It can't. And our students have a lot going on. You have a lot going on. And the expectation cannot be you guys are busy with this all day, every day. So with that said, I know that the documentation you guys have been putting in, what I just said now kind of felt counterproductive or just not the same as what that's requiring. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit as well in this update. So today, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about our documentations, what we can keep doing, what we don't need to keep doing. Hopefully it makes it a little bit easier. And then after that, just some feedback regarding a lot of the programs, or I'm sorry, a lot of our outside organizations and what they're recommending big picture wise right now. So kind of state of the state. So hopefully it's not too boring, but I am not going to, or the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the documentation because I think that's probably first and foremost on some of your minds when you hear that. So let's get into that. Initially, when this first came out, we were trying to get everything. And when I say we, I was talking about planning with attorneys and getting things from the state and all of the other different places where we get requirements from. And all of the recommendations is there's no requirement for this documentation, but there's a requirement for a free and appropriate public education and all of the things that we're used to, and making sure that we're doing what we can for our kids. And so that's where this comes into play as part of protecting ourselves, each one of us, and also making sure that we are doing what we can for our kids given the situation that we are in. So to get into that, the first piece is I cannot thank you enough for the amount of work that you did this week. Not only servicing students, but like I wrote down here, is that you had to do all these things for kids, create these plans, reach out to them, and then you had to double document it. And not only double document once in Power School and once on this form, but this form is actually requiring a lot more. And while I can't go back and erase all of that and take it all off of your plate, and I apologize for that, there's still going to be quite a heavy load when it comes to documentation. I think we can ease it up just by providing a little bit better clarification and adjusting now that we know how the first week went. So this week we had over 1,200 individual documentations in that one form for the individual and or small group contact forms. That's a lot. And as I was looking through it, I think there are some things that we can probably cut back on, and I will get to those in a little bit. So the first piece of the documentation guidance is what should be documented. And I'm going to walk through these kind of piece by piece, and yep, it's going to be boring as hell, but I want you guys to have a good idea of what should be in there and what doesn't need to be in there. And so hopefully that kind of pulls back a little bit on what you've been doing. So what should be documented? The individual student direct service delivery via video, chat, and or phone call. So anytime you connect with a student face-to-face or over the phone, and it's a one-to-one, and you're providing those services, just like in the IEP, so speech, social work, any of those things, that does need to be documented to show that we are providing services in some way. Specific support related to the student's disability. for individual students by case managers, paraprofessionals, or other staff. Sorry, guys, this is the third time I'm doing this video this morning. Hopefully this one works. So all of the documentation or supports given by these folks, that does need to be in there as long as it's related to the student's disability and it's for that individual student. So when I see paraprofessionals working with students on certain assignments, making sure that they have access to it, that's something you want to document. And that's awesome. That's maybe once a day. You don't have to do a different documentation for each thing that you cover. Maybe you talk to that student 3 times that day. Document it once. Just explain what you talked about in those moments that you were working with them or what supports you provided briefly. Next one, agreement with a family member and a student as to how services and supports will be delivered. This is really, really, really important, and one of the most important pieces of the documentation that's in there, as highlighted by all of our outside agencies as well. Sometimes what's written in the IEP and what we can provide or what's best for the student, it's going to be different. So let's say the IEP says that there's 60 minutes of a certain related service, but you feel that 20 or 30 minutes would be adequate and meet the student's needs. Then talk to the parent about that. And if that's an agreement, then make sure that you document that phone call and that you and the parent came into an agreement that you are going to do 20 or 30 minutes of that related service per week. Um, Once you have that documented, that's kind of like showing that, okay, our IEP is not going to work for the student at home at this case, but we've made this adjustment. So it's kind of like a makeshift addendum because there is no paperwork for e-learning or IEP paperwork we need to do. This is basically having that addendum in there, and it proves that we had that talk with the parent. And I put in here again, this one's extremely important, and I don't want to belabor the fact, but I'm going to, that the communication with the family is one of the most highlighted things that we need to be able to do, and those agreements, and then documenting those agreements. Group emails to families and or students still need to be sent. So special education, 504 support related only in this case. You only need to document once per email, not once per student, or once per message. So if you send one email to several families or several emails to several families, but about the same subject, just document it once. You don't have to put it in there for every single kid. I saw a few of them in there that were like 20 different logs for the same thing. So you don't have to do that, just log it once. If you send, oh, I've got to that part. I'm sorry, we can move on from there. IEP and 504 meetings. Please do document that you had an IEP or 504 meeting, but it only needs to be documented once and probably by the case manager. It doesn't need to have every team member that was in that or around that table. It doesn't need to say that we had, every person needs to log that because it's all going to be in this log sheet anyway, and that we all have access to it. Communication sent to other staff members regarding a specific concern for a specific student. So this is one of the confusing ones that it goes back and forth and it's really kind of hard to differentiate. And so I'm really going to ask you to use your professional opinion. If you don't feel like it needs to be documented, you don't have to. But if you feel it's something you want to document or it should be documented, please put it in. So an example for this week is we had a student at Grayslake North who was not getting into classes and doing the work. And folks were documenting that they reached out to the student, but the student did not get back or he was a no-show for services. The case manager put in that the student's Wi-Fi at the home was not accessible, so they couldn't afford it, and that the hotspot that was provided was not working in the home because of poor reception. So the student really had no access. Student starts panicking about that and it creates a negative situation. So by putting those pieces in there and by putting the documentation in there for that, we were able to kind of come to some sort of solution for the student so not everybody was panicking. So that was a case regarding a specific student. Please put those in there still. If you're just communicating about a group of students, say it's in your co-taught class, like I'm going to send out this tomorrow, are you okay with that? That does not need to be documented. So again, use your professional judgment there. And if you're in doubt and it's easy, throw it in. If you really don't think it needs to be there, it doesn't have to be. So what doesn't need to be documented? And that's probably what you're more interested anyway. And maybe it'll make it a little bit clearer as we go through this. As I mentioned before, mass emails do not need to be logged for every person it was sent to. If you send it to a number of families, you can just say sent to my caseload or sent to my co-taught classes. Anything like that, that's just fine. So, individual emails to student families regarding the same topic should only be documented once as well, as I mentioned before. You don't need to log the support provided to students and families that are outside of the special ed realm. So not students that are like not in special ed or 504, but if it's a topic that's not related to special ed, say like technology support for, I don't know, Schoology went down. You don't need to send or log that you contacted the student to make sure their Schoology was working, or basic school communication on how to take attendance and all those pieces. Those are things that are typically done for every student. And so those aren't things that you need to log into this form at all. You don't need to log that you had a department meeting because that's not directly impacting the services of students. And so that's great. I'm glad that department meetings are happening. And I'm glad that you are collaborating with other teachers as well. But not every collaboration needs to be in there specifically. If you collaborated with all of your co-teachers on Monday, Wednesday, then just put it in there once that you collaborated with all co-teachers. If there's something very specific, a problem that you were trying to address, then maybe you can document that. But otherwise, just keep it simple. You do not need to document the period by period daily work and contacts that you are doing. And I saw that in there a few times, and I got that question a few times about, almost like I did this hour and I did this the next hour. You don't need to be that specific in there. Really, just making sure that we are providing our students access is what we are looking for. And then any collaboration that doesn't result in a direct service or support for a student. And again, this was talked a little bit about before, but if you're a co-teacher or a case manager and you're communicating with other folks about just general things for students in special education, like if a teacher has a question about how are we grading this or where do I send this, you do not need to document that. The only time that you would want to document is if you're a case manager and you are working one-on-one with another teacher on a specific student's issue and you're trying to problem solve. That would be something you would want to document. So I hope that clears it up a little bit. And I put it in here on this document so you could refer back to it. And, if there's questions and concerns, we can go through those. So, there's no dumb questions. Don't feel bad for asking them because I don't know everything that you're doing either. I've never done this either. So if there's something that pops up, then let us know. Let me know. We can talk through it, work through it, and try to come up with something that's going to work best for what we're doing for our students. Um, again, it is important that we document those, so I can't tell you not to, and I can't say that we need to change the forms because the information that's in there is what's recommended and will help us, when this comes to the end and we have to figure out, what's next. Because it's a very real possibility that they'll say, okay, students fell behind this far. What are we supposed to provide? If we can show that we provided X, Y, and Z all along, then maybe we can just kind of move on. So that is it on the documentation pieces. So this big picture as of April 4th, 2020, so I guess as of 10 o'clock when I started all this morning, is there's lots of feedback from our different special ed organizations just based on this first week of e-learning. It seems like the entire nation went to e-learning and started getting all the bumps, bruises, and hiccups kind of out of the way, hopefully. So the feedback this week and the groups that I attended or the different webinars and stuff were from CASE and CEC and IAASE and NAS, DSE, and I can't even tell you what all those stand for. They're just all the different groups that we're a part of and have memberships to and that advocate for special education on behalf of students and schools. So they wanted to talk about areas that they're all advocating for, and they're all advocating in the same areas for some flexibility in regards to all of our requirements under special education. The first area of flexibility is the evaluation timelines. They're trying to make it so, right now we don't have to go by the 60-day timelines just because we're not in session. We should try our best, but those 60 school day pieces are not as heavily dictated by what's going on right now. However, the annual review timelines are, and they're saying that we should still have those. But we're trying to get flexibility, or the organizations are, from OSEP and OSERS, which are federal guidelines or the Federal Department of Education's special education groups. I'm trying to get them to add the flexibility piece so that we can have additional days after we come back, just in case parents don't want to have an IEP meeting over video chat. In that case, we'd still be not compliant. It wouldn't come back directly on you, but the district would have findings and we would have to submit reports, send them IEPs, and go through that process again. By getting the flexibility with the evaluations and annual review timelines, we wouldn't have to be doing all those. That would be nice. It would keep us from having to do corrective action plans, I guess, is what I was trying to say. And I put it as my next bullet point. I'm definitely not a professional video maker, so please don't judge me on this. um, Not providing services per parent request. So there are going to be parents that don't want to have services provided to their children based on what's going on. They may not be able to help their students. They may have lost their jobs. They may have had hardship in their families and don't want services or any education things provided. It's something you need to document, but it's not something that I feel our district should be punished for or fined for, whatever they're going to do, whatever our penance will be for that. But these organizations are trying to make it so that does not fall back on the district, because that should be up to the parent in these kind of crazy times. A little bit of flexibility on the maintenance of effort guidelines, and that is basically every year we are required to spend more on students with special needs than we did the year previous. And right now we're not paying for transportation in a lot of cases, or it's been reduced, and a lot of other things are reduced right now because we're not in session. If we don't spend as much as we did previously, then that impacts our IDEA grants and how much we get from that. So they're trying to fight for some flexibility in there so we are not impacted and we still get what we need to help our students grow. Looking for some flexibility in FAPE and what is in what is in the IEP versus what we are able to provide in this situation. And this is why that documentation of the parent agreements are so important, because if we do get this flexibility, we'll be able to look back on those agreements and say, this is what was provided because free and appropriate public education and what's written in the IEP does not apply to what we're doing right now. But good faith effort is showing that parents had input and we came to an agreement with them. The other area is the procedures area. So required IEP team members being present, signatures on proper forms, reporting on goals and benchmarks, all of those things. Those are pieces that we could get sued for, or someone could file a due process or have a complaint against us. And what they're trying to do is make it so that there is that flexibility and a little bit of relief from all of those efforts, because in the situation we're in, not all of those things can be acted upon. For instance, some of our freshmen have not had their first IEP at Grays Lake yet, and therefore they're not in our computer program, and we can't go in and get their benchmarks to update. So again, another one of those situations where we need some flexibility is to not be or have our hands slapped for doing the wrong thing when it's impossible. Um, they focus a lot on things that we should do and then some things that we shouldn't do. And so I'm just going to run through some of those now. I'm only going to do the ones that are important to us or kind of make sense to us, because some of them are ridiculous. I guess there are some districts out there not providing any services to students with disabilities or other or not disabilities, because the minute you provide services to students in general ed, then you have to provide them for special ed. So some districts chose to do nothing. That's not something that's good. So right now, the things that they say we should do are continue to check in with students, and especially students that may have higher needs. They may need more frequent contact. We need to check on students that may not have as such high need in special education, but we know that they have a bit of a little turmoil in their home life, and we should check in on them, because right now might be very difficult to be in the same home with a family they may not get along with, or maybe there are other hardships going on that will cause some struggle, and we need to be there for our kids. We need to engage as much as possible with parents and families, and I explained that before with the documentation pieces. Agreements with families and touching base with them and creating those relationships can only help. Make sure that gen ed services are appropriately accommodated, and that's what we're doing and documenting. And then document as much as you can, because, and their exact line was, if you didn't document that it happened, it didn't happen. That was from the case/CEC webinar I attended yesterday. That's something we've heard all along, but it is really, really important in this case, because it really is acting like the addendum page to the IEP, and without it, we don't have a leg to stand on. Keeping documentation in a central location, because much of it may and or will need to be printed out when this is all over. we may have to submit logs and forms of what was done in order to not have to provide compensatory services, or to prove that we did something that, who knows what they're going to come out with, but we want to make sure that we are as prepared as possible. And it talked about keeping notes about families who want less or no service. We talked about that. Make sure that we have that documentation, because again, if we don't have that, then they can say they didn't agree to it and we owe them a whole lot of services afterwards. Ensure that distance learning service decisions are individualized and allow for parent input. That kind of goes along with all of the other parent pieces. And I know I've said parents and families a lot, but I hope that it's kind of sinking in that that is probably the most important piece to do and make contact with and document. The things that we shouldn't do are wait till we get back to catch up on our services. That was one of those that that would probably end poorly for us. That'd be trying to squeeze in a lot of work next year. We should not rely on the fact that compensatory education is a thing. We don't want to provide compensatory education. And if we do, we want it to be minimal. If we need to provide it, there's no way that we are going to be able to provide services next year in school, in addition to all the services that the students may have missed now. I know it's speaking to the choir, and this is not happening in our district, and we are providing services, but there are districts that they were talking about that only want to provide compensatory education when we all come back. Not sure how that's going to work without doubling your special ed and time. Um, don't argue with parents when it comes to service and supports that are provided. The example they gave was if the IEP says 60 minutes of speech, we really should be giving 60 minutes of speech unless it's agreed upon that the parents are okay with 30. Now, if the parents are not okay with 30 and they want the 60, it's best to go with that and maintain that parent relationship, because really that's what's written in the IEP, and the student is owed that as of right now and the way things are written. However, if you feel that the parents are, making you stick to 60 minutes or whatever the case may be, and you feel that will bring harm to the student, or that it is not good for the student or not in the student's well-being, then contact an administrator and we will work through that with you. Let us handle those conversations so that you can maintain your positive working relationship with the families. Because right now we should actually be able to build on some of those by working in partnership with them. Let's see here. We should not plan to rely on your memory as to what you provided during this time. And again, we've talked about documentation enough, so I'll be done there, but memory is not a great thing when it comes to what we did. Don't rely on scattered documents stored in individual computers or locations. I had a lot of folks email and ask, can we store things on, can we do it our way? Can we put it in our own storage areas and stuff? The problem with that is that we don't all have access to it. We can't all see what each other's doing. And if something is not where we can access it easily, at the end of this, we're bugging a whole lot of people about a whole lot of different things. It's best to have it all in one place. And that comes from all of our different organizations recommending that. And the last one is don't stop sending regular meeting conference notices. Those are simple things. So things that we send out to have an IEP meeting, go through your normal procedures, send out the invites. Those types of things we should still be doing, and there's probably no flexibility and won't be flexibility in any of that. So walking away from week one, there's a few important takeaways just from working in District 127 and the things that we were doing, as well as listening to the different recommendations by the organizations. And the first overarching takeaway is that relationships with the families need to be maintained and or improved. Those are the most important things, and they said that those relationships are going to be the things that we can carry forward and probably utilize in the future to help students better their chances in education and beyond. Since the IEP may not address the students' need at home, the only real proof we will have of a good faith effort is to document the agreements made with parents regarding services. I think I've beaten that one to death, so we'll just move on. Family and personal health come first, and that includes you. They talked about going outside, getting fresh air. If the sun's shining, go outside and get that fresh air and that sunshine, especially this past week because it didn't seem to be out there too often. In this one, you'll hear a lot, and this is cause no harm. Josh sent out a video yesterday that talked about this as well. This has been talked about all week, is that nothing should cause harm to a student's educational process, like grades, at all. due to this. And so students' grades shouldn't go backwards. That's percentages, that's letter grades, that's minuses, pluses, what have you. The students should only be able to get better from here. Um, and then the biggest thing was stick together and stay connected, from a distance. But make sure that you are collaborating with people at work and maintaining those professional relationships, because while we're stuck at home, it's great to be around our families for most of us. But we also do need some of those adult conversations and those relationships that we've formed over the past several years. And right now, that's missing for a lot of people. So maintain that and keep going with it. Other than that, I don't have anything else for you for an update. I know this one was kind of long, and I apologize for keeping you so long, but just wanted to kind of give you an update as to where we are at this week. Again, thank you for everything that you've done for our students, for each other, for others around you. I've heard some really great stories this week, and it's amazing. And love working with you guys, and just hope that we can maintain through all of this, and we can keep our students growing, and we can all maintain our sanity. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will talk to you all soon.